The definition of mindset that I've come to is that it's the interplay between the frames that we hold up to the world, the assumptions we make about what's happening in any given situation, and how we feel about it physically and emotionally. How we feel, think, and see generates what we know, what we doubt, and that's your mindset.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Jean Gomes, who's a New York Times bestselling author, CEO and founder at Outside, and co-host of the Evolving Leaders Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about his new book, Leading in a Nonlinear World. Jean will share how your mindset works and what the latest science tells us about how we construct reality. He shares how you can build and strengthen your mindset and the mindset of others, the mindsets that are foundational to the world's fastest growing organizations, and how to apply this knowledge to improve your personal well-being, leadership, and solve topics such as strategy, innovation, and culture. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Jean, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, I'm really well, Chris. Lovely to be here.
We've spoken online quite a few times, and now you're here in the flesh. How have you been, first and foremost?
I have been very well, very busy. Post-COVID, life has changed dramatically. From several years of sitting in an office to traveling the world. So I've just been out and about a lot.
Amazing. How's the book going?
It's had a really good reception. Happy to say sales are good, and
nice.
Had some lovely reviews and great, kind of feedback in the work we're doing around it. So yeah, it's been very positive.
Amazing. Before we get into more about the book, tell everyone a little bit more about you personally and your journey to where we are now.
Yeah. So I started off as a neuroscientist. That's a long time ago. It was my first degree. And then I found myself in consulting, working largely on change programs at an individual and global level. Worked all around the world, worked with a very big variety of industries and organizations. And about 15 years ago, I, looking back at all of the big projects that we'd done, I came to a conclusion that there was something missing in the change agenda, and that's kind of the origin story of what I'm doing today.
Mm-hmm. So, because my next question was going to be what inspired the book, Leading in a Nonlinear World. What was the inspiration behind that?
Well, I think two things coming together. One was this journey to try and find another way of thinking about how people change and adapt to the environment, and the other was just this colossal sense of change and uncertainty that spiked massively from 2016 onwards, and a number of things happened to me in that year that just made it very, very it felt very important to try and work on this in a new way. Yeah,
it feels like perfect timing when we first spoke, given current events. Obviously, it's not great that the things that are happening around us, but it felt like your work and the book becomes even more relevant right now. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, it's deeply purpose driven. I've kind of got to a point now. I've been doing this for 37 years, so I've got a kind of point in my career where what I'm doing is something I want to leave a legacy, rather than just it's not a commercial priority for me. It's more to do with solving something I deeply believe needs to be solved.
Who's it for?
It's for everybody, and even though this book is quite an academic book, it's kind of like the credentialization of these ideas. Future things that I'll do will be aimed at a much broader audience. But essentially, how do you make sense of yourself in the world when things get crazy and we're in this unbelievable pressure cooker of demand and uncertainty? So it's for everybody starting out in work and those who are leading it.
I saw a video where you spoke about what the word mindset means to you, and I realized it was very different to what I thought and very different to what I've heard others say. So what does the word mindset mean to you?
That's a good starting point. Well, I didn't really know. And when this word kind of became very, very popular in Silicon Valley 15 years ago, largely because of the work of Carol Dweck, it became like a code word. And when I asked people, and we subsequently asked thousands of people what it meant, they didn't really know. They knew it was important. They kind of thought they should know what it meant, but they were using it as a label for all sorts of things, ranging from how this person shows up, their kind of state, their personality, their social affiliation, the ideas they hold, all sorts of things. So it's a kind of blurred and fuzzy thing for something that's so important. And when you ask people about Carol Dweck's work, again, they had this very superficial understanding of a growth versus fixed mindset, because the idea has a great degree of rightness about it. So I wanted to find out what it actually meant. And I read and talked to neuroscientists and psychologists all around the world, and they didn't really know. They had all pieces of the puzzle. And what I came to really was that the definition that people had fell into two broad categories. One was more like a dictionary definition: mindset as an attitude or a belief. How you show up in the situation is largely shaped by this belief. It could be a Brexit mindset, or it could be a project management mindset, or something like that. And the other thing that they routinely described was mindset as an idea, something external to you that you hold, a frame that you look at the world through, and so on. And that could be through your expertise. It could be about politics. It could be about being part of a community, and so on. But essentially, those two things are very different, and people use them interchangeably. So where I got to, having spent a lot of time working on this and looking at all the descriptions of mindset in academia and in the business world, there's kind of two things that are going on. These descriptions are a partial description of what a mindset is. But what they do is they describe what a mindset is, and what a person who adopts or holds a certain mindset does in terms of behavior or the ideas that they use. So I looked at 1,000 papers on entrepreneurial mindset. None of them told you how a mindset worked. They all told you what it was. So here are the 6 behaviors of somebody who has an entrepreneurial mindset in a corporate setting. And the problem with that is that tells you only half the story. It's useful, but if I said to you, look, adopt these behaviors, the chances of you being able to do it are very slim.
Yeah.
Because the origin of those behaviors comes from what's going on inside people. So I wanted to find out.
And their
what that looks like.
experiences.
Their experience, their skill sets, the way they look at things, how they feel about risk and uncertainty in different situations, and so on. So that isn't part of that story in any of those papers. So the frustration I had with it was, particularly when you're trying to help leaders drive growth in large organizations, and they say to their people, like, we need you to become more entrepreneurial, and here's the program and stuff, and they just don't do it.
What are some of the new understandings of mindset from the research?
Yeah, so what's really exciting about this is that when I was studying neuroscience, and probably in the subsequent 20 years after that, it was a very interesting field, but it wasn't particularly actionable. That stuff that you learned wasn't particularly actionable in the real world. And in the last 10 years, things have dramatically changed with the quality of it, the intersection between psychology, neurobiology, and scanning technologies. All of this stuff has now come into a place where we can learn stuff that we can use. The definition of mindset that I've come to is that it's the interplay between the frames that we hold up to the world, the assumptions we make about what's happening in any given situation, and how we feel about it physically and emotionally. How we feel, think, and see generates what we know, what we doubt, what we ignore. And that's your mindset. And it's a broker between what's going on inside you in terms of personality and culture and genetics and all that kind of stuff, and what's happening in the outside world. So it sits in between you and your interior world and the exterior world, and it helps you to navigate. And once you understand that, there are mechanisms of mindset that neuroscience is teaching us can be developed and strengthened. So you can actually build a mindset. You don't have to adopt one. Now, here's the 6 behaviors. You don't have to adopt it, which is a high failure rate. You can actually build one. That's the exciting piece for me.
So what are some sort of practical ways then that people can use this?
Well, I think the piece that's most neglected and misunderstood is the feel part of it. Essentially, you've got this brain that's constantly making predictions about what's going to happen based on the past and the circumstances you find yourself in. So this predicting brain is constantly trying to reduce the amount of energy it uses, because it's a very energy-rich kind of demand, by making predictions, because predictions are cheaper than reaction. So if you have a moment in your life where you felt exposed or doubtful about your worth or your competence in the situation, that's a prediction about what's going to happen in the future. But what happens is that your body actually creates the circumstances for that before your mind does.
Oh, wow.
So your physiology will change when you're in that situation. And that leads to you constructing emotions to make sense of that situation, and that might be fear or anxiety or doubt, and that generates then the kind of self-talk. One of the simplest ways of thinking about it is that, let's imagine we're in the Arizona desert and a big rattlesnake comes along. What happens first? Do you feel fear, or does your heart rate go up?
Maybe heart rate then fear.
Yeah, your heart rate. Your body knows maybe seconds
That's
before
crazy,
your body starts to generate these emotions. And you make emotions to make sense of what's happening. There are two things that sit here that are actionable for our listeners. The first is that when we tune into physical feelings, we start to build physical intelligence. This is like the foundation of a mindset, where when you are more clear about what your body is doing, you're more likely to interpret the situation better. So there was a good example of this. Neuroscientists went into a trading floor in 2016, and they measured the sensitivity that those traders had to the physical signals within their body. And they do this in a really simple way. So we could do it right now if you wanted to, but it's essentially you calculate your heart rate for a minute and someone measures it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between your guess and the real number is your interoceptive accuracy, your ability to know what's going on inside your body. And this is a really simple way of doing it. The people who had the greatest sensitivity were about between 17 to 25% more profitable, and their careers were consistently longer. And that's because in a situation that's incredibly pressured, with huge amounts of uncertainty, and these guys only get paid if they on the basis of the bets. They don't get a salary because they can tune into their body. Their body tells them what's going on, because the principal purpose of physical feelings is to give you a readout of your safety in the world. So your body knows intuitively.
That's
when you're
so crazy that your body knows before you.
Yeah.
I had it the completely opposite way around.
Well, there's another example of this in a gambling test that was devised by the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, where he asked people to do this kind of quite traditional, in psychology terms at least, test where you have 4 decks of cards and you're turning them over to make money. You've got a pot of money that you're given, and as you turn them over, some cards give you money back, some of them you lose it. You will detect over a period of time of doing this is that 2 decks are good and 2 decks are bad. And it's really to find out how long it takes you to know that. What's interesting is that he devised a test where he measured the skin resistance of people and their fingertips, because when you experience any form of threat or risk, you produce micro amounts of sweat, and they could measure that. And what they noticed was that when people were touching the decks of cards that were bad, the sweat spiked before they knew. Sometimes 10 turns before they knew.
That's crazy.
So physical intelligence is actually an incredibly powerful resource that we can draw upon, because it gives us something we all have access to. It's not about your intelligence. It's not about your wealth or means or anything like that. Everybody can develop this. So that's the first thing. The second thing on the feel part of it is that we all know that emotional intelligence is important, but we're kind of missing something about how to action it. The thing that people like Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's just an absolute rock star in the neuroscience world, has come up with a new way of defining what emotions are. Instead of them being hardwired responses to the things that are happening in the world, so, I'm rude to you, you get defensive. Mm-hmm. That's a kind of hardwired response, and you can't really do much about it. It's not actually what's happening. What's going on is the brain is constructing the emotion to make sense of the physical toll that little bit of unsafety is creating in you. And depending on how you see that and how you react to it, you can change the narrative very dramatically. So you can reframe it, and you can offset it. One of the things that comes with this is that we don't really know what we're feeling most of the time. It's suppressed in our culture. Just don't acknowledge what you're feeling. And most people have between 5 to 6 words to describe what they're feeling. And most of those words aren't emotions at all. They're physical feelings. I'm tired, or I'm just a bit drained, or, I'm pumped, or whatever it is, or I'm fine, which doesn't say anything at all.
Nothing. Yeah.
And if you don't know how you're feeling, you don't know something very important about what's happening to you. Because negative emotions, in this predicting brain, negative emotions are really error signals telling you that a core need in you isn't being met. And when you know this, you get to first principle problem solving. So if you're in a situation where, in a boardroom or in a conversation with my team, and I'm suddenly starting to experience, feeling judgmental or defensive or angry or something like that, really there is one of maybe a dozen core needs that's signaling. So it could be, I'm physically not resourced, I'm just exhausted, or I need to go to the bathroom. I don't feel valued by you. I don't have a sense of volition, control over this situation. I don't feel connected. I'm being excluded. I don't feel informed. I don't feel purposeful, and so on. And when you recognize that that emotion is telling you that, then you calibrate your problem solving. You don't act out. You don't make interpretations about what people's motivation is.
So it's about like catching you in the moment, catching yourself in the moment and go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then work through that.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just trying to avoid the negative emotion. It is reading the negative emotion as a valuable source of information rather than going, no, you just need to stuff that down. You need to adopt a poker face and try and ignore those feelings. And the most reliable thing for me is to defer judgment. When you're feeling a physical reaction, just focus on the physical reaction. You know, I'm triggered. I can feel my heart rate going up. I can feel myself feeling. Just stay with that. Don't say anything. Don't do anything. You're not actually in a state where you can read the emotion. Just let that physical reaction calm down, then read the emotion, and you'll solve so many problems.
One of the things that I love about your work is the link with well-being. How does this help us improve our well-being?
So I think it starts with an understanding that there is a prevailing mindset at work and in society about work. In the past, probably served us okay because the costs of that mindset were outweighed by the benefits. And that mindset is a sacrifice model. And basically it says you have to be all in to succeed. So that's the frame, you know, that how you see the world. The assumptions that come with that frame are that there is no other way. If you want to be successful, you have to give everything, and that means you have to sacrifice your health, your well-being, your family, your interests outside of work, and so on. And when you do that, particularly when you don't get anything else in return, which a lot of us are not really feeling we are, is that you feel a predominant emotion of resentment. And that you can't tolerate. So you have to justify it. And so you end up justifying why your family is not getting what it needs. I'm doing this for you, for example. Yeah. Or I can't look after my health. Well, my job won't let me do that, and so on. So that prevailing mindset is the one that we need to reverse before lots of other things can happen for us. And the mindset we need to increasingly try to figure out is how to build a sufficiency mindset where we get what we need. Because when you don't get what you need, you pay it forward. You can't get what you need if you're in my team. And then your needs are not met, then all your performance is undermined. And we create burnout and we create inflexible organizations. So all the higher level mindsets that sit on top of a sufficiency mindset where my needs are met, like innovation, inclusion, adaptation, all of those are, you know, sort of working suboptimally right from the start.
So how do we build a sufficiency mindset?
The sufficiency mindset starts with a needs-based lens, which says if we meet people's needs, then we create more value. They can bring more of their value to the table. And that goes beyond the kind of superficial well-being stuff. It means designing the organization to actually enable people to be sustainable. That means if you look at lots of job descriptions now, people can't cope with the jobs. They're just crazy. They're just destined to fail from that perspective. The processes and systems that are in many organizations mean that, you know, people are spending 20 hours a week actually trying to get around the systems to get their jobs done and so on. So you look at all of this and you go, well, that's not a needs-based culture. It's a sacrifice one where you say, do it in spite of. Then we need to think about, well, how can you create value out of people's needs? And this is where the AI thing comes in, because as we start to automate more work, we want to be asking ourselves, what do we want from people in that world? We want them to be better at four core sources of value creation, being able to see what's going on in situational analysis, really be clear-sighted about what's happening, to be able to do creative problem solving freely, to be able to make really good decisions, and to be able to form and enrich relationships. All of those are undermined when our needs aren't met. If you're feeling resentment and you walk into your team, how are you going to create value?
Yeah.
So we need to elevate our sense of value, and I think that's the big shift we need to make. Is like, that's the people innovation agenda, is how do we create value by meeting people's needs, which is completely the opposite of what we're doing today in many cases.
Obviously, you know, our audience are HR leaders. Do you think this is a role of HR? Who should own this?
I think HR do have a role in it. I don't think they can do it on their own. And many of them wouldn't think they could, because when you talk to them about these things, they acknowledge it as, you know, an important challenge, and then they think about it from a practical point of view, and it's not going to happen. So I think they have to build a coalition around this and bring other people into it, because organizations that are starting to do this and think like this are going to become the ones that people want to work for.
Well, you mentioned or like systems and processes already. That's something they need to get IT
Yeah.
and the rest of the business. It's everyone. I feel like everyone. I feel like my answer to that is everyone. It's everyone's role.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't it be brilliant if you kind of applied a design thinking methodology to organizational design? Organizations are designed to be efficient. They're not designed to enable people to create value.
That's a good way of putting it. Very simple. We mentioned change. I feel like the last couple of years have been really tough, and one of the people that suffered the most in many ways are those line managers and leaders who both trying to take care of their own mental health and well-being, but also of the others of their teams, right? And that they lead. How can this help leaders and managers face change differently? And it'd also be good after to maybe go into some of the characteristics that you see in the CEOs and the companies that you work with.
I think the first thing that you mentioned there around the middle manager layer, they are the most essential value creators in the whole of the organization, and they're often the most deprioritized when it comes to these things. So the leadership team comes up with this enormously compelling new idea for change. Then they spend a little bit of time trying to convince this level down to do that and their day job
exactly.
At the same time. And they don't give them any real resources to make it happen because they don't really understand the capacity of the organization. So I think that the challenge of the most senior leaders is to actually understand the capacity of their organization, and they don't. I don't think anybody does. I mean, I know one big company that we work for, the IT director came in, new IT director came in and did an analysis of the amount of emails that people were having, and it ran into gigabytes a day that the majority of people were getting in their inboxes. Now, no human being can deal with 500, 600, 700 emails. Just even reading the headers and trying to figure out which ones to read.
It's exhausting.
So we need to be thinking about the capacity and where the limits of that are, and then what we can actually achieve with that, because ultimately that's what you've got. So I think there's something there. And then the second piece for middle managers is that they're often the most skilled, knowledgeable people in the business. And I was just with a group yesterday, and it was just remarkable watching them solving problems and how positive, and all the things that the layer above seemed unable to do. They were just doing it brilliantly. I wish they were watching them. It was fun. It was funny. So I think there's a lot of talent in that area of business, which is often mischaracterized as the cynical layer, the lead lining, all this kind of stuff, and nothing could be further from the truth in many organizations. So I think we need to rethink that. And then coming back to your question about leaders that I've seen that have done extraordinary things, the starting point is that it takes a level of awareness and understanding of values to be able to do this, what we're talking about here. I'm researching a story at the moment about a particular leader who's done something extraordinary in their career, and just trying to get under the surface of how they've done that. And they have intuitively built this sufficiency mindset. And the way they've done it is to really hold themselves deeply accountable to what they want in their life, and then ask themselves, are they living those values? And it's meant that they've drawn some absolute red lines in what they are willing and not willing to do, and then achieved in spite of those red lines, because everybody else says, well, we can't do that. You can't be successful if you do these things. And I, in confidence, I can't say what those things are, but they're things that, narratives that we tell ourselves, well, I can't be successful and do that. And they found a way of doing this. They've moved from the either or to the both and. And I think that's the big challenge, that we need to find leaders who are willing to push themselves to be able to role model and push the social innovation agenda. Because if they say it's impossible for themselves, what chance does anybody else have?
I was going to ask you that. Part of that was, how do we do this for our teams? And I was assuming that unless we can do this ourselves, it's pretty difficult to set that example for our teams.
Well, I think this is where you get the kind of like the clash between knowing and doing. Because like I go on this course and it says these are the 5 things you should do to help your team have good well-being. They're all things that we know. And then because I've had a period of time where I'm absolutely burnt out, and my team member turns around and says, look, I need a mental health day, or, can we spend a bit of time talking about this? And you just act out and go, we haven't got enough time for that. And, get realistic. Are you really not seeing what's going on?
Yeah.
Now, that that's wrong, but you're acting from deficit, you can't actually arise to the challenge because your needs haven't been met. That's the the vicious cycle that we're in.
You mentioned earlier the inclusivity piece. How does this help us create inclusive cultures?
Yeah, so I think there's like a hierarchy of mindsets. So if you have a sufficiency mindset, then your basic needs are met. Your chances of being able to build more sophisticated, complex mindsets on top of that are much higher. An inclusive mindset really has the counterintuitive idea that at the root of it, if you want to be empathetic and you want to be able to include people into your world that are not like you in any way, age, gender, and so on, you need to accept that the biggest barrier to that is your vulnerability when you're around them.
Interesting.
People like that who are not like you make you feel vulnerable. And when you don't understand that, the emotional response you misread the core needs of feeling valued, secure, in control, and so on. So you have to be able to deeply embrace, and that word embracing vulnerability is often used, and it sort of everybody gets a bit squeamish about it and so on, like it's associated with weakness. It's not. It can be. It's strength.
I've said that before. Like since I started sharing my journey with my battle with my mental health and well-being, I always saw it as, that's why I never shared it for like 15 years. I was so terrified. And the moment I started sharing it, I actually realized it's actually one of my biggest strengths.
Yeah,
I have much more meaningful relationships with my team, my family, my wife, my daughter. Everything improved.
Well, you're embracing part of yourself that otherwise you try to ignore. And so you're not your whole self in that situation. And you can't also see what you need, because those feelings of vulnerability are telling you something about what you need. And when you pay attention to them, you don't need to have the perfect language to deal with the inclusive agenda. You don't need to know the perfect kind of things to say in every situation, because people will feel your vulnerability, and they'll feel, and you can be a bit clumsy and get through it. But so that's the first piece, really, I think, in terms of a mindset, and that means paying attention to how your body and emotions are reacting. Because if you're not, you're going to do,
That's not a natural thing. Are some people more naturally notice that more with themselves?
Yes.
Like, is that a skill that, or is it more of a skill that needs to be developed?
Well, people sit on a spectrum of all of this in terms.
What do you call that spectrum? What do you like?
It's a sensitivity spectrum to their physical feelings.
Is it emotional intelligence or not?
No, it's physical, because it's called interoception.
Interoception. Interesting.
And interoception are all the signals inside your body that are giving you a readout on your body's resourcing, your body budget.
Okay.
And those signals, all the sensors inside your body, get pulled through nerves into the heart, and that's why the heart rate is such a good indicator. And then that gets fed through the through the vagus nerve to the insular cortex and the part of the brain. And the more you tune into that, comes to actually how do you build a mindset around all of this. The more you tune into those feelings on a regular basis, through mindfulness or body scans or anything like that, you actually strengthen this connection, and you strengthen part of the insular cortex that allows you to regulate your energy and your decision making under stress. So people who do this is why those traders make better decisions, is because their brain mobilizes resources for decision making quickly ahead of when they need it.
Wow.
And then it calms the brain down afterwards, whereas people who don't get panicked and their brain spikes and it doesn't calm down and they can't think. That's the difference.
Wow. Have you done any research with athletes on this? I bet it's fascinating to see that happen at the top of the level of sports.
Yeah, well, if you think about an athlete, and I've worked in the Olympic system in tennis and other sports for a long time. If you think about athletes, are actually generally pretty good on this front. They're pretty connected with their bodies because they pay such attention to it. But imagine for a moment an athlete running around a track who has a very solid connection with their body. They can feel the floor. They're really rooted into that sense of physical connection, versus one that hasn't. Where's that person's brain going to be? Instead of focusing on themselves, they're going to be focused on...
I'm 4 people behind. I'm not, they all start thinking negatively and start, as opposed to being... Is that kind of what people call flow state?
Well, flow state is a psychological experience that comes from sort of several layers of connectedness. So if you're
Okay.
connected to your body and you're connected
All right.
and
So
you're
see.
then deeply focused into something you love doing, then you experience this flow state, which is the absence of effort. Everything seems
Yes.
easy, and
Yeah.
time disappears and all this kind of stuff, and you can stay in that, for quite some time, and you're operating where you have maximum access to all your neural capabilities. So you're able to think more creatively, you're able to think big picture and then zone between detail and so on. So it's an amazing state to be in. And you can generate it through exercise, you can generate it by, really deeply focusing on something you love and so on. But those connections are almost impossible to achieve when you're exhausted or fatigued or emotionally, in a negative space.
One of the things I was thinking about whilst I was having this whole conversation is, how do you hold all these different mindsets at the same time? We've spoken about sufficiency mindset, future now mindset. So it's a lot.
Said like that, it might seem so. I think when you boil it down, it's quite simple. You're asking yourself in any situation, any given situation, because we all do this anyway. We are able to adapt and use different problem-solving techniques in different situations all the time. We do it intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
A mindset really is, well, how am I seeing this situation? What am I feeling? What assumptions am I carrying? Is the frame I'm holding up to this situation helping me to see what's there?
Love that.
And that's it. And the more you do that, the more you ask those three questions, the more information you get about what's actually happening and how you're responding to it, how you're making sense of yourself in this situation. And if you think about the moments where you feel least secure, that's when it's most important. Because if you rely upon things in the past that have got you through in situations where you're experiencing it for the first time, you might make a really big mistake, a big error judgment that might lose you your career. I mean, the stakes are very high now, particularly for senior people, where just one unguarded comment on a town hall meeting reverberates around the world, and guess what? They don't get promoted or worse. So we need to understand our mindset and how it actually orientates us to situations. And so I think at the simplest, it's that. It's how I feel, think, and see. What's that allow me to do in terms of making sense of things?
Well, I think that's an amazing way to end the podcast, and that's such a great practical tool just to ask yourself those. Take a pause, ask yourself those 3 questions, and take a minute before you react and say something wrong. But I appreciate you coming on the show. It's honestly, I could speak to you forever. It's absolutely fascinating, the work that you do. And it kind of, when we first spoke, I was like, why are we not having these conversations? Why are we not speaking about this inside of organizations? I speak to HR leaders and other leaders every day, and this isn't something that comes up. And I'm like, it almost seems crazy that we're not having this conversation. So I'm really excited for everyone to read the book. You also got the audio version. Where's the best place for them to find a copy of the book or
Amazon's
the
the easiest place to get a hold of it.
And where can they connect with you directly if they want to reach out to you personally?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn or on my website or at john@weareoutside.com.
Amazing. And I'll also definitely do a special shout out to your podcast, The Evolving Leader. There'll be a link in the description wherever you're listening or watching right now, so make sure you subscribe to the podcast. But apart from that, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I wish you all the best until next week.
Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure.